If people only knew what just happened behind the scenes, there are a multitude of things are happening. But good morning to you. IB Countdown to Kickoff is up and rolling. He is Vince DeDario in his milky whites. I'm Sean Stiers wearing my blue from head to toes. There are one, we had a couple technical things outside of our control, but two, as I just discovered, there are a couple new feature buttons, and I think I accidentally, when I thought we were going live about 3 minutes ago, we just did a test run of the start of the show, by the way. And then Vince recognized, I'm glad you recognized it when you did, and we didn't do an hour of this show that wasn't recording and live, but we are live. Good morning to you, wherever you happen to be. Brent in Monterey. There was someone else in New Jersey. I think there was someone in North Carolina who chimed in. Derek, of course, is always happy to see Vince's white sweatshirt. Good to see you, Vince. Good to talk to you. Good to talk to everybody else as well.
Yeah, I mean, we had a great open, by the way, that you all missed. It was a great open.
The first open is better than this open. I'll tell you that much.
Well, look, it was a great open. I couldn't find my white sweatshirt. My wife had done the sweep of the laundry. I was looking all over for it, and then we can't hear each other, and it was chaos. It was chaos.
Total chaos. Maybe it's the snow outside. Who knows? Maybe that's what it is.
I'm gonna try to blend in with the snow.
Andrew down in Florida. Tyler, who I believe is also stationed down in Florida, if I remember right. And we've got Eastern Pennsylvania, Sparks 5219. We've got David out in the state of Washington. Glad to have everyone with us wherever you happen to be today. It is snowy. It is cold here in South Bend. Final home game of the season. Of course, that makes it senior day. Notre Dame and Boston College, 2:30 today at Notre Dame Stadium. We'll talk about senior day and, all that kind of stuff in a bit. We might as well just address the weather right off the top, though. Rob wants to know what effect today's weather might have on the game. What do you think, Vince?
I don't know if it's going to have a huge effect. I think that I am going to be very cold if I was sitting out in the stands, which I'm very happy that I'm not. Brian, did Brian call you and ask you about, Brian had some tickets. He's like, hey, if you want to take your son, you guys can go sit in the stands, the whole thing. And I'm like, this is the worst possible week that you could ask me that question, but I'll ask him.
This is not, no.
Good Lord.
That would not be enticing to me. I took Jesse a few times when he was young. I would give up the press pass to somebody else.
I was willing.
We would get tickets, through the station sometimes and that kind of stuff. And I'd go do it. The first time we actually did it, his very first game, it was Notre Dame, West Virginia. And I believe it was either 01 or 02, but it was pouring down rain outside, of course. So we've got the ponchos on and all that kind of stuff. We did it a few other times as well.
I wanted to. I love going to games with my kid. We have a really good time. But it's a high of 26, I think, today. And like I said, my son has a soccer game indoors. He's like,
I'm too old and spoiled at this point.
Yeah,
I'm not coming out of a climate controlled
seriously
press box to sit with, whoever out in the stands. I'll be like, if I could get them tickets, I'd give them tickets. But hey, you want to take your friend, whatever.
Right. Absolutely.
No, I'm not coming out of the press box.
I was down with that. I'm like, hey, if you want to take a friend, he's like, Dad, I got a game. I can't go. I'm like, okay, hey, oh, shucks. Too bad. But it's going to be, I don't think the weather is going to have a whole lot to do with the actual game play.
Yeah.
Once you get out there, it's cold when you first walk out on this, whatever. It's going to be fine. I don't believe it's not supposed to be snowing at the time of the game. It's just going to be cold, and you suck it up and you deal with it. We've all played in the cold before. Some of those hits can be a little jarring at times, for sure.
Yeah.
But it's the same for the other team as well. So, and they're from Boston. This is Northern Indiana. Everybody's used to playing in the cold. Shouldn't be a problem. I don't see the gameplay being much different.
Yeah, it's funny because Jesse and I were talking about the weather forecast and everything on Thursday, and I was talking about how I never really, when I was in high school or wherever, never played in really cold weather like this. But as a broadcaster, I've called some games in cold weather. One of the first games, one of the first seasons I did, there was a snowstorm in the playoffs and stuff. It was a lot of fun. It was cold, but, and of course I talked about how a couple of years ago when Mishawaka went to semi-state, they were playing in a snow game out there. And then I was thinking, like, this would have been semi-state weekend, or this is
Correct.
semi-state
This is
weekend. They would have
semi-state
been
weekend.
playing in it again last night in the freezing cold and snow had they
Yeah,
made it.
a lot of
But
good outcomes, by the way. A lot of fun outcomes last night. But it would have been that. It's not the day to be a sideline reporter.
no,
Obviously, you put me on the sideline a few times in the snow, which is awesome of you. Appreciate that. But yeah, I mean, look, you just deal with it, and it kind of can make the game more fun. You're not going to see guys sliding around in the snow or anything. I believe, based on the social media that I've seen, the grounds crew got out there, cleared all the snow away and everything from the field. So that's not going to be an issue. There's still going to be snow around, I
right.
mean, it's going to be cold. There's going to see your breath. It's going to be, thank goodness the sun will still be out for the
I
vast
hope we get at
majority of the
least some
game.
flurries during the game, though. I think
That
it's
would be great.
it's always like there's a reason you remember the Snow Bowl game of 1992,
Absolutely.
and this week was the 30th anniversary. Reggie Brooks and all that kind of stuff. One, it was a great game, but two, anytime you have snow like that, it's like just the appeal, especially of watching back sort of those highlights and stuff like that, but also when you're watching it on TV. That's why I get why they moved that Buffalo Bills game to the Dome in Detroit, but at the same time, you'd remember it more if there was snow falling down in bucket loads out there
Yeah, that would
on
have
the
been
field,
great.
you know.
Yeah, I
But
actually looking at the weather report, there's supposed to be maybe some flurries during the game. So that could potentially happen. And I will also say that it'll be much sweeter since I'll be indoors.
yes,
It's fun to watch.
RTDB, baby, run the damn ball. That's
Absolutely. And that's what they
all I
should
gotta
do.
say.
That's their strength anyway, right? I mean, that's what they should
Yep.
do. Play action pass, all of those different kinds of things. So, totally fine. Make it happen. Play to your strength. Nothing wrong with that.
Yep. So, of course, Notre Dame coming off a 35-32 up and down performance in their win over Navy last week. They led 35-13 at halftime, then held on for dear life to finish off the victory. We usually say, what did we learn last week? That's one of the first things that we talk about. Forget that. Just do this for me. Describe last week's game in one word for me.
Inconsistent. And that's, I mean, it's a tale of two halves, right? I mean, the inconsistency was glaring. I mean, they were firing on all cylinders in the first half. They were executing at a high level. They were doing all the things that they needed to do. And when I say they, I mean players and coaches, right? I mean, they were all executing at a high level. And then they just swapped out jerseys with a brand new team and a brand new coaching staff. And it was just bad. I mean, it was just bad. And the more you go back and you look at the film and everything, it wasn't just the play calling, although that could have helped. It was a lack of execution. And I hate to jump on the bandwagon of Coach Freeman and his mantra, but it seemed like every single play, there was one or two guys that weren't doing what they were supposed to do, and it completely blew up the play. It was bad. It's just bad.
I get it. You're drinking the Kool-Aid now of the whole execution thing, and I know why.
True.
But
It's
my
true.
word is bewildering. Because to look so good for one half and then completely regress into a completely different team by halftime is bewildering. Like when you think they've put some of this garbage behind them against lesser teams and all that stuff. Pine goes 14 of 16 in the first half, 234 yards, 5 total touchdowns, 4 through the air, 1 on the ground in the first 30 minutes.
Yeah.
The 5 touchdowns matched his previous 3 games combined. The 4, touchdown passes and the rushing touchdown. The 234 yards in the first half alone would have been the 3rd highest passing total for a game in his career. Let me say this, because I realize a coach, Tommy Rees, Marcus Freeman, whoever can sit there and go, well, we had the right plays called. They just didn't get them executed. And like you're saying, well, 1 or 2 guys each play. Okay, I get that to an extent. I can forgive that again for 2, maybe even 3 series. But where are the adjustments where you go, okay, these things aren't working. Now we have to try something different. They didn't do that. And that's my fault. Like my fault with the plan, their failure to adjust, to give them simpler things to do. I talk about 21 personnel all the time. Look at what happened when they ran 21 personnel. The very few times that they did it, all those plays were successful. And when Navy is committing 8-9 guys rushing and they're clogging up the run lanes. Obviously, they're getting in Drew Pine's face. They sack him 5 times. If you have 2 running backs and pick your 2 of the 3, because any of the 3 can do, whether it's Tyree, Diggs, or Estime, if you give him basically your one, you're not max protecting on the line, but you're still giving him extra protection in the backfield with those 2, and you're also giving him 2 safety valves, to leak out, whether it's screens, little flares, whatever. You're giving him places to throw. You're giving him a hot receiver. Look at what happened when he got the pressure in his face in the first half and he hits Audric Estime for a 30-yard touchdown pass. I think 26 of it was yak, yards after catch. So, yeah, I get it. You can always fall back on execution, but as the coach, when what you're giving them is not working, you've got to make adjustments to simplify things as far as possible until you find something that works. I'm sorry, 20 plays for -2 yards in the second half is not just execution. There's blame to go around on all sides on this.
Oh, and I agree with you. There is absolutely blame to go around on all sides. The problem is it felt very much like no matter what they called, it wasn't going to matter. I mean, I to be honest with you, because we've seen Drew Pine try to throw a screen pass. He sucks at it. He can't execute.
Sometimes. I mean, sometimes he's hit him. It'd be nice if you were better than 50% completing a simple screen pass.
All I'm saying. I mean,
he might be 30% on screen passes, but
it's
still.
poor. It is very poor. Now, they didn't call any to see if he could do it, right? And listen, I coached high school football for a long time. I called plays for a really long time. When you are in a position to call plays and literally no matter what you call, it doesn't get executed, it is like banging your head against the wall. I'm not saying that is 100% the case because you are dealing with Division I athletes. You should be able to call some stuff that actually gets executed.
And I mean, honestly, we're not just talking about Division I athletes, like as Mac Brown pointed out after the North Carolina game, and I think it's even more appropriate now, like when you see what Notre Dame did to North Carolina and to Clemson. This is a Notre Dame team that is recruiting in the top 6 or 7 in the nation. So we're talking about, not the elite of Georgia, Alabama right now, but they are in that next tier. They're right behind them, and you should be, you should expect more on all levels. Both with the execution, but also in your ability to adjust to find things that'll work for them.
And the one thing that Notre Dame has not done well this season is adjusting at halftime. They haven't done a very good job of that. And you're not going to get any argument from me on that. My other issue from a coaching standpoint is if your kids aren't executing, find somebody who will. Because some of the things that were going wrong, that we're not executing properly, were not majorly easy things. I mean, hard things to do.
Right.
Put somebody else in. Sit a guy for a series. What's wrong with that?
Well, or just put more running backs on the field instead of tight ends, because the running back group is the best position group that you have on offense. More of them is always going to be better to me. They can all block, they can all catch, they can all run. And if the running lanes aren't there, find a way to get the ball in their hand. Estime and Tyree each had 1 catch. They each went for touchdowns in the first half. They didn't throw to them in the second half.
Agreed. They can't block. They couldn't block in last game. They sucked at it. They were terrible. All 3 of them.
Well, but again, because they're, Navy's committing all these guys to the all this, again, there are different things that you can do with them other than what they were doing.
Fair enough.
They didn't adjust.
Fair enough. And your All-American tight end sucked at blocking. There was a lot of sucking at blocking on last Saturday.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's not this Saturday.
We went into the game talking about would they finally have a 100-yard receiver, and Braden Lindsey, 5 catches for 67 yards. Jaden Thomas, 3 catches for 80 yards. Like the first half alone, it looked like they were going to get 2 receivers with 100 yards.
You and I were talking about it. We were texting each other. It's like, well, guess that one hit, and lo and behold, it did not. Did not hit. Not even close, unfortunately.
Yeah. Again, you look at the 6 second half possessions, 3 plays, -6 yards, 3 plays, 4 yards, 6 plays, -1 yard, 3 plays, 8 yards. And that 3 plays for 8 yards is when they actually converted the 3rd and 15. When, one of the very few times that Navy didn't blitz in the second half, they drop 8 into coverage instead. And Pine hits it. 3 plays, 1 yard, 2 plays, -4 yards. And again, 20 plays for -2 yards in the second half. And, again, like most of what Navy was doing in the second half had to do with bringing pressure. And they obviously blitzed Drew Pine quite a bit. And in the first half, even when they did blitz some, not the same kind of blitzes I don't think they were doing in the second half, but like he was finding windows in the zone. That's kind of been his Achilles most of the year is when teams do drop 8.
Right.
But he was actually picking apart the zone with precision in the
That's
first
why
half.
Navy changed their game plan, or not changed
Right.
it, but they went all in on load the box, bring the blitz. Like they went all in on it because dropping 8 wasn't working. Because Drew Pine here's a funny thing. Drew Pine forced Navy to adjust at halftime, and they went against what he was doing well, and they decided to blitz him and put all the pressure in his face.
And again, that's the thing. They adjusted.
Yes.
Notre Dame didn't.
Correct.
And that's really the biggest knock, I think, on the staff as a whole, not just offense, not just like I think the offense has been the worst at adjusting.
Yeah.
The defense, there are still some issues there with adjusting. And sometimes, again, it's just like trying to get too cute. Like if things are working, you don't have to change it too much. Keep doing what you're doing. Sometimes they out adjust themselves. But that's my biggest knock is the in-game adjustments. And this has been a program that has done that fairly well in the past. But that's the biggest thing I think they've got to catch up on at this point. My question, do the second half struggles to you completely override all the good things the Irish did in the first half?
No, because then you're just an overreacting fan. Because it can't. It can't, right? I mean, you have look, if you told me that Drew Pine was going to sit and pick apart drop 8, that's great news because he hasn't been good at that up to this point. And he did a very good job of that in the first half, right? So you have to give credit where credit is due. He was very good in the first half. There were a lot of aspects of the team that were very good in the first half. You can't discount that like it didn't happen just because the second half is a more recent situation, right? You have to take the good and the bad. It was all
still
part
recency
of the same
bias, right? Still recency bias,
right.
Even though it all happened within one game. It's just, I think I said the other day, if like you would have had a bad first quarter, good second quarter, bad third quarter, good fourth quarter, then it's a little easier to ingest, I guess. Like if the result stays the same, but at least, like again, that to me would show, well, you're adjusting as the game went on. Or, you're not just stuck in this one pattern and you're holding. That would be a little bit easier to take. But so no, it doesn't completely override everything good that happened in the first half, but it muddies things up quite a bit.
It does to a degree. I mean, there was a lot of good that happened in the first half. So, I mean, you have to talk about it, right? And it was all in the same game. And so you can talk about the good, you can talk about the bad. And I think both are appropriate from that game. Is there a song there?
The facts of life.
There you go.
Old 80s sitcom.
I know the facts of life, Judy. All right. So, no, there's a lot of good that happened. You can highlight the good that happened, but you have to talk about the bad. I mean, you have to. You have to talk about the bad, and I might even push more towards the bad than I do the good. And we talked about it during the week, Sean. If you flip-flop the halves and you come out terrible in the first half and then you're better in the second half.
That too. Again,
that change your thought process a little
bit. It does. Just, like what I was saying, like if you intersperse it quarter to quarter, but you're exactly right. Like if you have a bad first half, when you have that kind of lead against Navy, it's never supposed to be close again. Or against, any of the academies with their triple option offense. If you're playing a triple option team and you're up by 22 points, it should never be close again. That is not an offense that's built to play catch up. Biggest favor Navy did was taking 10 minutes off the clock to start the second half and settling for a field goal. If they punch that in the end zone, we're having a completely different conversation, I think.
Absolutely. Today. And I actually think if you twist the game and you flip it from one side to the other, and they came out and they were horrible and had negative yards in the first half and then just exploded in the second half, I think that's worse for the program, not for the game, but for the program, because that meant that Marcus Freeman didn't have this team ready to play.
That's true too.
So that would be a bigger red flag to me than what actually occurred, because they were clearly ready to play. Now, you got to keep them playing the entire game, right? But one of our biggest questions going into the game is how are they going to respond after the big win against Clemson, right? I think they responded quite well.
For a half, they looked great.
They
and
looked
then it's
great.
just like everybody stopped.
Yes.
It was, it was almost like, like they had, like we talked about going for the kill shot against Clemson. It was almost like, obviously we don't know exactly what their mentality is. And I'm talking about more from the coaching level than I am from the player level. But there is always that when you're playing Navy and it's Veterans Day weekend and the whole thing. And Marcus Freeman obviously does have the veteran connection with his dad, career Air Force guy, and all that kind of stuff. It's almost like you don't want to embarrass Navy, so you're not going to keep running up the score. So they were, stuffing it a little bit, maybe trying to, take some air out of the clock and just, kind of work your way through and be done with it, that kind of thing. There was definitely not the same kind of killer instinct on whatever level that you want to talk about.
No, I mean, my thought process watching the game was that they, put the bag, they stopped going for it, right? Because they had a very killer instinct in the first half. Like I thought the clock management was excellent. They went down and scored twice in the last few minutes of the game. Part of that was because Navy was stupid and did that reverse pass. But at the same time, they were calling timeouts the way they should. They scored twice. Like I was very happy about that, to be honest with you. I was like, okay, they got that killer attitude, blah, 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 blah. And the way, when you go back and you watch the film, they were still going for kill shots in the third quarter and in the fourth quarter, but they were not executing them for a variety of reasons, right? But at that point, you need to adjust what you're calling because that just isn't working.
And again, let's kind of finish up with this thought. I think the bigger picture question now is the blueprint potentially that Navy could have given Boston College and USC. Did they give them a blueprint that, like the same Irish attack ran for 263 yards against Clemson 2 weeks ago. Boston or Navy shut that down in the second half. Did Navy give BC and USC a blueprint for success?
I hope that BC and USC come out and try to do exactly what Navy did, because I think that Notre Dame will burn them in so many different ways, because I don't see them succumbing to that kind of pressure more than once. I just don't. So I hope they do. I hope they put 9 in the box and blitz the crap out of Notre Dame, because I think that Notre Dame's going to make them pay, because number one, that's lazy coaching if you're just going to do what Navy did. And I don't see that being the case necessarily by these two teams. But I hope they do that, because in the first half of the season, it was drop 8. That's what you wanted to do against Notre Dame. That's what Navy did, and it burnt them. Right? I hope they load the box and they do everything that they want to do. And if Notre Dame can't adjust, then that's on them. But they have the ability, they have the talent to do it. I hope that's what they do, because I think that those games could get lopsided very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, Navy blitzed Pine on 9 of his 10 pass plays in the second half last week. They sent pressure with at least 7 guys, 8 of the 10 pass plays. The one play Navy didn't was the one that I talked about, the 3rd and 15, where Pine hits Deion Colsey for a 21-yard gain. They sacked him 5 times. He went 3 of 5 for 35 yards in the second half. Again, they blitzed him in the first half, but differently. It wasn't just, load the box, bring the house, and blitz. So BC, USC, neither one of them are just going to all of a sudden switch their defense and go, everything's going to be a 0 blitz. We'll just bring pressure all day long, 0 blitz.
Go for it.
In Pine's face. They're not going to do that. Will they blitz? Because every coach, they'll see things, and you know how this is. It's like see things, and every coach has their own plan. They might say, well, we need to make sure that we blitz more often, something like that. I don't think that they're just going to load the box and, bring all these all-out blitzes against Drew Pine and, and see if that works. So I think we'll probably see more blitzes, which you should. But again, Drew Pine was successful against some of them in the first half. You still have to, and again, some of it still comes down to play call, because there were times in the second half where you've got receivers sitting there short, whether it's a little dig or a slant or whatever, but Drew Pine just didn't see him, or if he did see him, he didn't make the throw, So again, some of that's on him, but there were other times for the kind of routes that you're running were not conducive to helping, set the quarterback up for success. I still say more running backs, fewer tight ends. Manipulate the box by don't just go 13 personnel and go, well, we're max protecting. Spread guys out more. Don't let Navy bring, or any team. Don't let them just bring more men into the box because you're starting off with more men in the box. Spread it out with more receivers or running back, whoever you want. Get more guys out in the formation to take more hats out of the box and make them have to cover, because whether it's Navy last week, Boston College today, Notre Dame has man advantages
absolutely
against
across
those guys all day long.
Across the board. Wide receivers, tight ends, get them out. Wide running backs, get them out in space, and Notre Dame is going to have a lot of advantages there.
That's right. So now it is Notre Dame and Boston College, and the Fighting Irish have won 18 consecutive games now in the month of November. That streak continues.
Do you remember the narrative that used to happen with Brian Kelly that he was terrible in November?
I know.
You remember that? We would talk about that a lot, about how poor Notre Dame was in November and all these different things. And that was all the way through 2016, really. And then, of course, the script got flipped when they changed everything. And since then, November has been an Irish month.
It has.
Before that was like the big narrative is Brian Kelly can't close and November is terrible. And remember all that? Like that was a huge storyline.
The only good November they had prior to 2017 was 2012, really, because obviously they ran the slate there and got to the BCS championship game. But every other November was always just a mixed bag. And they were all, some head scratchers when they got into November. And you're right, just basically when he turned the program upside down after 2016 is where everything flipped. And getting some of these different ACC teams in there has helped. But don't forget, included among those 18 consecutive November wins, a pair of wins over Clemson. So, it's not like they're just beating, pushovers in the month of November either. So
good programs. And obviously you've got USC every other year and, all these. So, November's been good to Notre Dame the last few years. That's fantastic. That's the way if you're going to construct a team and you want to talk about how they're playing, you want to be better down the stretch. You want to be better at the end than you were at the beginning, right? So, I think that this is great. And they have an opportunity to extend that, and they've got one tough game to make sure to keep that streak intact.
Right. They've won 4 consecutive senior day games, of course, 27 straight against ACC teams, 8 straight against Boston College as well. So a lot of trends in Notre Dame's favor going into this game. They beat them 40-7 in South Bend 3 years ago, 45-31 at Boston College back in 2020. If Notre Dame beats BC, Vince, should Marcus Freeman's first season be considered encouraging, considering it didn't turn into a complete dumpster fire after the losses to Marshall and Stanford?
Yes. It can be encouraging. I just I would reserve judgment until the USC game is over, if I'm being honest.
You still don't want to lower your expectation.
Right.
Basically.
Because if they, they dominate BC, which they should do, right? On paper, Notre Dame should dominate BC, period. Right. But then if they go lay an egg against USC, I'm rethinking that comment. You know what I mean? So encouraging is if they win out, absolutely, right? Encouraging, absolutely, because he did turn it around. And it's still hard for me to justify losing to Stanford in October, right? But at the same time, you finished strong. You did what you needed to do down the stretch. Those are all good things. But they should take care of business against Boston College. A home team, right? It's a home game. It's senior night. Or senior day, I guess. And BC is not a good football team. They have 3 wins, something along those lines. Like they should not be a game.
Neither were Marshall and Stanford, though.
I agree with you, but they've hopefully moved on from that, which is the point of the question, right?
Well,
hopefully
and again,
they've moved on.
We were sitting there after they lose to Marshall. They beat North Carolina. They beat BYU. We're talking about, okay, maybe the corner has been turned. Then here comes Stanford. And that happens. And now
you're right.
They at least followed that with a win over UNLV, another bad team. But this is still if you're looking at how things have happened this season, BC is no different than Marshall and Stanford. They should have beaten both of those teams. They didn't. We're at a different point in the season now. Obviously, again, we're much later in the season, the last home game of the regular season, one of 2 games remaining in the regular season. So, I guess as we spin this into this week, what it needs to look like to make us feel good about Notre Dame heading to USC next week, this needs to be a convincing game where it is not close throughout. I mean, that's honestly what it needs to look like, because this is a bad Boston College team. Now, their offensive line is coming together a little bit and some things like that. We'll get to Phil Jurkovec and stuff here in just a second. I did see a question about him come up, but it needs to be a convincing win. It should not be sloppy by any means. We should not see stupid false start penalties by the offensive line in the home stadium, and that's still where most of those have come up this season, have been at home. Should not see that. We shouldn't see a team uncharacteristically turning the ball over. They've done a better job of that really since, Estime stopped fumbling.
Yeah, true.
That's been night and day different. So it to me, it should just be a game where there's no doubt who the better team is today.
Absolutely agree with you. And they need to put together a full game, right? Start to finish. I'm not asking for Stanford level intensity, but Clemson level intensity, but I am asking for Clemson level focus. That is what they need from start to finish, whistle to whistle. They clearly didn't they did it for a half last week, but they couldn't do it for a full game. If they do that for a full game, this is going to be a 3-score or more game. It just is. From a talent level standpoint, from all the things that Notre Dame has advantage-wise over BC, if they can do that for an entire game, it should be a 3-score game, period. Yep. It should be right around where the line is. Should is the key word.
But again, remember, they've not covered a double-digit spread all season. 0-5. 0-5, baby.
Yes,
Rob,
sir.
all they asked for is a complete game today.
Yeah.
I think that's what everyone wants to see. Hugh predicting a big game for Estimate Mayor and especially Tyree.
Oh,
that would be interesting because Tyree has kind of disappeared again for the last 5 or 6 weeks. It really is. To have a talent like that and to see, like when this came up at the beginning, after the first couple of games, where's Tyree? Where's Tyree? They got the ball to Tyree and the offense looked a heck of a lot different when they did. But again, that's disappeared. And that's, I don't know if it's because of depth or because they, Tommy Rees thinks they can do other things.
No good reason.
When you have Tyree and one of those other 2 backs on the field at the same time, there's so many mismatches you cause, and like you hear these guys, like the analysts and stuff, talking about manipulating the defense and making them, move their eyes when these guys start moving around, and guys that you have to account for. That's a big factor when you've got 25 on the field and one of those other guys at the same time, and they just aren't taking advantage of that anymore.
Yeah, and I'll give a lot of, and it sounds like excuses for the coaching staff or the players or whatever, but there's no excuse for not having Chris Tyree on the field and using him and what his skill set brings you. There's just no reason. And it's very frustrating to see game in and game out that they just can't or won't, I'll say won't, they won't use him in the offense the way he's meant to be used. Right? He's not the between the tackles guy. Yes, you can run him between the tackles from time to time if you have an advantage in the box and that kind of a thing. Okay, that's fine because he makes one guy miss. He's probably taking it to the house. Okay, but what about a buck sweep, some outside zone, putting him in motion, getting him into the slot? All of those different things, the 2-back sets like you talk about all the time. Just use the man.
Just when you have a defense that is keyed up on your run game and you put Estime and Tyree in the backfield together at the same time, and you show, like a play fake to Audric Estime and then Tyree flares out the other way, that's going to go for 15 yards guaranteed every time. I guarantee you.
Yeah.
Because one, they don't use it that much. You start doing that, it's frustrating.
extremely frustrating because it seems like it's so obvious and that it's right there in front of us. So why is it not right there in front of Tommy Rees and the offensive staff? I don't know. If I was Dylan McCullough, I would be fired because I would be going into Rees's office daily and asking, why is 25 not getting the ball more out of the backfield?
Yes.
Why?
Yes. Jeremy hopes that Xavier Watts gets more playing time this week. I mean, Xavier Watts, when he's played, has looked good, but BC's going to throw the ball around more. It was still, that's why we haven't talked much about the defense, because it's a one-off playing the triple option, unless you're going to end up playing Air Force in a bowl game or something. It's like you just can't put too much into that. He played exceptionally well last week.
He had like 8 tackles or something like that. But remember, he also played very, very well against the option last year. He's really good at coming downhill and making tackles because he's a very physical player. His issue, which is getting better, is in the pass game. They're not playing the triple option. So there's going to be things that you're going to see that are different. And somebody else had also mentioned, I don't know if I started or not, but they're saying, if Marist's play continues to be bad, then he has to be sat. He was bad because he was playing against an offense that he should not have been playing against. And I said that 100 times. This is completely different. They have figured out how to use Marist against traditional offenses. That's where he needs to be. But the injury to J.D. Bertrand forced him to play a lot more and forced him to play on the inside where he's just not good.
Assignment football is not his strength.
No.
His strength is being able to use his athleticism and just reacting. Being assignment sound against a triple option offense. Not Marist Liufau's strength.
No, he should not have even seen the field last week. And Brian and I kind of battled on that back and forth. At the very least, he shouldn't have been in the middle. Okay, he should have been on the outside.
But it's also tough because you don't have J.D. Bertrand, and you've got to play somebody. And they gave Jalen Sneed made his debut, and he was solid out there. And we're going to see more Jalen Sneed. It sounds like it'll be interesting with Bertrand back, like what that looks like. Could we see Sneed more instead of Marist? I don't know, but because of the whole, the red shirt. You don't. Last week was the first of the last 4 games, including the bowl game. So you can see a lot more Jalen Sneed and Jabron Payne, who was back there as the kickoff return man last week as well.
No, absolutely. And you have to take last week's defensive performance in a vacuum, right? We can nitpick missed tackles. We can nitpick, certain things, but this does not translate to playing a regular offense. And so you have to, go off of all the other games as opposed to this game if you're talking about sitting guys and less, playing time, and it's a one-off, and that's just the way it is.
Right. Stymie said he'd love to see them just accept pine as pine, lean heavily on the run again, own the clock, rotate all 3 backs all day long, working in a few sporadic passes to keep the Eagles defense honest.
To a degree, I get what you're saying, but you can't just be a run team. You have to be able to throw the ball. Even BC can load the box and stop the run.
Yeah.
Right. And Notre Dame has had success running the ball against loaded boxes. They've been okay at it, right? They did a good job against it, against Clemson. But that's not always going to work. You have to be able to throw the football. You have to.
Like Jason asked, with Minchie on campus, will Tommy Rees's game plan be more pass heavy, or will he stick to the bread and butter run game?
You can't change your game plan based on a recruit that's
being in town. That's right.
Sorry.
The game plan has to be what the game plan is, what you think is going to be successful. We can all disagree or agree on, what is or isn't successful, what we think should be.
Right. No, and here's the thing. Kenny Minchie, if we're talking about him specifically, him coming in on campus, it's a formality. Right? It's a formality. He decommitted from Pitt, and I'm echoing Brian's words. He decommitted from Pitt with an idea of what he's doing next, okay? And it's no coincidence that he's coming to Notre Dame immediately, all right? You don't change your game plan based on a guy that you pretty much have in the bag.
Yeah. A couple super chats here real quick from the same person. I think his question got kind of cut off or something. For all the ups and downs of the season and all the burn the whole thing down after Marshall and after Stanford, if we win, would it be more or less satisfying than if we would have, say, beat Marshall and Stanford and lost to Clemson and USC? So because you lost to Marshall and Stanford, I think what he's saying is if you beat Clemson and USC, will it be more satisfying in the end?
It will not be, because they didn't win the games they were supposed to win. It's great that they won the big games. It's great. It's great. but you didn't win the games you're supposed to win, so it's not more satisfying. It's if they would have won the games they were supposed to win and they lost to Clemson and USC, I'd still be disappointed. I mean, I just would be.
And if they end up beating Clemson and USC, but they lost to Marshall and Stanford, you've cost yourself a college football playoff berth.
Right.
Because they would be in the mix right now. They would be sitting probably ahead of LSU right now. And LSU is, of course, number 6 this week.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, at least you can say there is some encouragement and you moved on from that and showed progress. Part of the whole mix of this as well that I think I brought up earlier this week is we still do have to remember that Drew Pine as a starting quarterback is 7-1 right now. So like for all the frustration you have with Drew Pine, his strengths, his weaknesses, his ups and downs and the whole thing, that guy is 7-1 as a starting quarterback.
True.
So I think you do kind of have to keep that in your mind. So to be able to beat Clemson and USC with that guy, even though you're frustrated by what happened early in the season, there would at least be room for encouragement finishing off the season. Sure. But yeah, it doesn't make it more satisfying, I don't think.
Right. Yep, exactly.
Come on, Marshall. I mean, come on. Talking the other day about how I made Jesse become a Cowboys fan. There was a question from a guy who said, I've got all these family members who are USC fans. How do I keep my son a Notre Dame fan? And I said, well, he lives in your house. So to start with, even if, you get the USC gifts or, whatever it happens to be, you just send that to Goodwill, So I didn't necessarily make Jesse become a Dallas Cowboys fan. I just I played a little defense, made sure he wasn't going to become a Washington Redskins fan, which was, my dad was trying to push on him. So, dad lived in, different state, different town, the whole thing. And he would send the Washington gear. And it's like, no, that's not happening. So I didn't force it upon him.
Right.
But I made sure to emphasize, we watched Cowboys games every Sunday. We watched Notre Dame games on Saturdays.
I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah.
Even my daughters, they can pick, when they were babies, they could pick out Notre Dame, the Cubs, they knew what I was watching. Daddy, you watching the Cubs? Yeah, I am. Why don't you have a seat next to me? Let's watch together. That's how you work. That's how it goes.
That's right. And we are not Marshall. I know you were playing, but I'm just explaining.
Part of my job is calling CPS. I've done it numerous times, and there is not a box to check about sports anywhere.
By the way, thank you, Cameron. Thank you, Cameron, for the compliment. And Vince is fired up today. Vince is fired up.
It's the sweatshirt, man. I throw it on, I become a new man.
That's right. So just some kind of going down the list. Brandon Joseph, doubtful. Doesn't sound like he's going to play with that high ankle sprain, and especially like when it's cold and stuff. And I don't think there's any reason to push it. JD Bertrand's 100%. Freeman says he'll play. Missing last week with a groin injury. Jack Kaiser expected to play as well. So everyone wants to know about Phil Jurkovec now as we look at Boston College. Jeff Hafley, of course, the head coach, the former Ohio State defensive coordinator. I mean, they're not where I thought they would be in year 3 under Jeff Hafley, especially when you consider you do have Phil Jurkovec. They went 6-5 at his first season, 6-6, went to the Military Bowl last year, and now they're 3-7 coming into today after knocking off NC State. And of course, you've got the John McNulty connection. The former Notre Dame tight ends coach left here, becomes their offensive coordinator, first time as an offensive coordinator. They're running the ball for just 61 yards a game, which is last in the nation, and 39 sacks allowed, which ranks 126th out of 131, and scoring just 19 points a game. Offensive line has been a mess all season. They've rushed for over 100 yards. That was against twice. That was against Maine and Louisville. And now this is supposed to be the Phil Jurkovec homecoming. Of course, Phil behind Ian Book for 2 years. Then he transferred to Boston College after the 2019 season, that was the same season as Hafley's first year. It was seen as a huge feather in Boston College's cap to get the former 4-star recruit and all that. Injury riddled the last 2 years. He's played only 8 games this season. He's missed their last 2. Concussion protocol. He's also got some problems with the back of his rib cage. And I think the other one, what what was the other injury? There was another
like
one,
4 or
a
5.
right knee as well. Yeah, Halfley like went through like a laundry of things,
Yeah.
that are wrong with it. And the offensive line is horrible. Jurkovec alone has been sacked 25 times this season. Both quarterbacks combined have been sacked 39 times this season. So the answer to the question is no, we don't know if he'll play. I'm sure Jeff Halfley would say this. I'm sure, Phil Jurkovec is going to say it. He's going to do everything that he can to try to get out there on the field today. Don't you agree?
100%. I mean, he's probably in his last year at BC, I would imagine, and he's going to, he wants to play at Notre Dame Stadium, and that was always his dream growing up as a kid. He just didn't think that he would have this gold helmet on instead of the one that the home team is going to be wearing. So yeah, he wants to play, and you can say what you want about Phil. He's one of the toughest guys that I can remember from a quarterback position. He's a tough kid, and if he's walking and he can convince Coach Halfley to put him on the field, he's going to play. So I fully anticipate seeing him. I don't know if he'll start or how much, he'll be out there, from a competition standpoint. The dude wants to play. And I think he's going to get a fairly warm reception, if I'm being honest, from Notre Dame Stadium, and, unless he goes out there and wins the game for him. But, I anticipate seeing number 5 at some point during this game.
Yeah. As Tommy was saying, making the kids watch the Cubs. Talk about child abuse. My son, Jesse grew up a Cubs fan, and I didn't make him watch Cubs. Like we would watch the Cubs in this house. I like the Cubs, but I don't consider myself like diehard like you or right. Jesse for that matter. He full-fledged bought into the Cubs, and there were a lot of years like we would go to those games and he would cry. He's like, "Why do the Cubs lose all the time?" And I'm like, ask that guy 100 years ago, because he's crying. He was crying about the same thing you're crying about right now.
It just made 2016 that much more sweet. All right.
That's right. So back to Phil, though. We can play the what if game, Vince. What if Phil Jurkovec had stayed at Notre Dame?
Phil Jurkovec he's a good quarterback, right? I mean, I remember watching him in high school when he came to Notre Dame, and he was with his 7-on-7 team, and they were at camp, and they won the championship at Notre Dame Stadium. And I was super excited about getting him to South Bend. I think he's a good quarterback, right? Is he better than Drew Pine? Yeah, he's better than Drew Pine. So, I mean, if he was here, he'd probably be the start. Well, if you have to go back, he might have been out of eligibility. I can't do all the math with where things would be, right? He probably would have been the starting quarterback last year for sure. They would not have gone out and gotten Cone. I think Phil would have been the starting quarterback. So,
and the problem is he obviously didn't want to wait that long,
right?
He was getting frustrated with where he was.
Yeah, I get it, and he didn't have the best relationship with some of the people here. And okay, I get that too. That's why kids transfer, right? And we see it all the time. And we've seen kids transfer in the middle of the season this year, right? So, I think he would have started last year. If he comes back this year, he probably would have been starting again. He would probably be a 2-year starter for Notre Dame. And,
right.
You can guess as to what the wins losses would be, but he would be starting over what they have right now.
And that's, again, so he's backing up Ian Book, obviously, in 2019. And, even, I guess, what would that be? Was he here in 2018? Yeah, he would have been. Yeah, he was here in 2018 as well. So he's backing up Ian Book for a couple of years. But what's interesting, like Ian Book, Jack Cone, Tyler Buckner, Drew Pine have a combined pass efficiency rating of 155.18 in that stretch from 2020 through this season. Jurkovec's passing efficiency rating in that same stretch is 132.71. So their combined pass efficiency, even with Drew Pine and what he's done this year, is 23 points higher than what Phil Jurkovec has been able to produce. And like when you look at wins and losses, I mean, 2020, they go 10-0 in the regular season with Ian Book, get to the college football playoff. Last year, 11-1, and they just miss out on the college football playoff. So, it's like, would he have been the starter? You would expect that he would have by last year. But as far as on the field, with the exception of maybe this year, because then, he's potentially a second-year starting quarterback this year, like, it's hard to envision a world where Notre Dame is appreciably better with Phil Jurkovec than what they ended up having the last couple of years.
I see what you're saying. I think it's also comparing apples to oranges because of the supporting cast that he has around him, Boston College.
But again, they went 10-0 with Ian Book.
That's
they
great.
went 11-1
That's
with
great.
Jack
You know
Cohn.
what?
So
there's a lot of quarterbacks you could have put behind center and they go 10-0 in 20.
No, I know. You don't like either one of them.
Terrible schedule.
You love Phil Jurkovec.
Has nothing to do with who the quarterback was. I'm talking about the schedule that they played. There's a lot of people that would have gone 10-0 in that schedule. That's what I'm saying. That's all I'm saying.
But my point is, Phil Jurkovec, Jack Cohn, whoever it happens to be, it wasn't going to get that much better just by having Phil Jurkovec. Do they beat Cincinnati? I guess that's the biggest question. That's the only,
I see what you're saying. No, look,
there wasn't that much more of a ceiling to go to.
They have one loss, right, in the regular season between 20 and 21. I get what you're saying, 100%. I'm just saying comparing the stats is apples to oranges because of what he has around him. There's no quarterback that's going to be successful behind the offensive line that they have at Boston College.
Fair.
That's all I'm saying.
I think the bigger question is, because of who the offensive coordinator was the last 3 years, because it would have been Tommy Rees.
Sure.
How was he going to build that offense? Because when Phil got to Boston College, they were completely willing, and again, you've got a first-year head coach, you've had a different offensive coordinator back then, but they were completely willing to let him play to his strengths, which was not the case, it seemed like, based on how things were laid out at Notre Dame when he was here.
I agree with that. I do agree with that.
Yeah.
I don't think he was allowed to be himself. Like we talked about when he played in the spring game, right? And he struggled in the spring game because he wasn't allowed to play like he plays, right? They were calling sacks when there was a guy in the vicinity. He wasn't allowed to get out of the pocket. He wasn't allowed to do a lot of the things that make Phil who Phil is, right? And so I think there was a distorted view of how good he could have been as a quarterback, right? Because he wasn't allowed to do it. So who knows what it would have been like if he was here, but I think you make a very good point that I don't know that the offense would have been tailored around what he does well.
Yeah.
Because he's not a pocket quarterback.
Right.
He never has been. He never will be. Right. Remember, what year was it? Was it 2020 when he led Boston College to a bunch of comeback wins and they were beating a bunch of ranked
his first
teams?
year there. Yeah.
That was all Phil. He was doing that by himself, and I was thinking, man, that would be awesome to have him in a Notre Dame uniform while Notre Dame's going undefeated, right? Granted. So he's a playmaker, but I don't know that he would have been allowed to make plays at Notre Dame. I think he would have been hamstrung. So that's a really good point.
So if he can't go today, it's going to be Emmett Moorhead, redshirt freshman. He played in 2 games last year. He's played in 8 games this season, completing 58% of his passes, -2 rushing yards. Again, those quarterbacks are just getting beaten up. Now, their offensive line is supposedly playing better, even though they've still given up 5 sacks in each of the last 3 weeks. So
that's the bar.
I guess you're grading on a curve, right?
Yeah, the bar is set pretty. They're playing better. They're not failing anymore.
No place to go but up, basically. So
they are playing better. I will give them that. They are playing better. Yes.
Right. Then, of course, you've got George Takis also coming back to Notre Dame. He transferred after last year, and he's having a career year. 24 catches, 248 yards. I mean,
great decision.
He had 8 total catches for 78 yards in 3 seasons at Notre Dame. Now, he would have been another great blocking tight end for Notre Dame this season, but he went to BC. He got what he was looking for, I think. At least the ability to catch the ball.
Yeah. Well, and he got what he was looking for in that he's the number 1 tight end there, right?
Exactly.
I mean, that's what he wanted. He wanted to be the number 1 tight end. He deserved to be the number 1 tight end. And the problem is nobody in the country is better than Michael Mayer, and you're not going to be ahead of him no matter what you do. So leaving was absolutely the right decision for him. And I think it's paid off. He's got good film now. He has an opportunity to get drafted, in maybe one of the lower rounds or whatever. And he still has that Notre Dame tight end background, right? But then on top of that, he actually has some stats, which is different for tight ends.
I think it's going to give him a chance to have an NFL career, basically, to show what he's done.
I think 100% made the right decision. And I'm actually excited to see him play today.
Yeah, definitely.
He's always been one of my favorite guys.
Their defense is decent. They give up 157 rushing yards a game, 4.1 per carry, 209 passing yards a game. So teams aren't just moving the ball at will against them. And again, that's going to be the key, is what Notre Dame can do against this defense. Notre Dame's defense against BC, on paper, it's a total mismatch.
Oh, yeah.
When you look at it. Now, they do have Zay Flowers who can make some plays, decent receivers, but Notre Dame should be able to get after Jerkovic or Moorhead, whichever quarterback it happens to be back there. The BCD, this again, it's the biggest question. What's Tommy Rees and company and Drew Pine and company going to be able to do against this defense?
Absolutely. And that's, let's be honest, that's the question we ask going into every game, is what is this offense going to be like when they take the field, right? Are they going to be the first half team against Navy? Are they going to be the second half team against Navy? Or are they going to be something in between, right? The offense is the biggest enigma of this team all season. The defense has at least been steady, right? They've had issues. They've given up, long drives at the end of games. There's certain things that, of course, they can work on and get better at, but they've at least been steady. The offense has either been really good, really bad, someplace in the middle. You just don't know. This is a great matchup for Notre Dame. It should be a great matchup for Notre Dame, whether they want to run the ball or whether they want to throw the ball. They should be able to do what they want to do. Is the game going to be called correctly? Is the game going to be executed correctly? It's game 11, and we don't know the answer to that. And that's
a problem.
I think that's like, if there was like, the 2022 season, we just don't know. I think that's the tagline for this whole season. We just don't know.
All right, so now we're going to hear from Dan Rubin. He works for BCEagles.com. I talked to him this week. We talked a lot about Phil Jerkovic, a little bit Jeff Hafley, and the rest of the team as well, that offensive line that they have. And you'll appreciate this, Vince, when you see he's got a little co-pilot with him here in this interview. To talk a little Boston College right now, and we've got Dan Rubin with us from BCEagles.com. And for those watching the video, you can tell he's got a little assist going right now as well. Congratulations, first of all. She's asleep. We'll see how long that lasts here as we get going, right?
This right here is all of the football knowledge in my house comes. This is our source, is the sleeping baby. I just absorb everything. It's one of those where I'm hoping and praying that she'll sleep through. When I say she'll sleep through anything, I probably shouldn't say that too loud. But she is all my football knowledge. So if I make any wrong assumptions about this game, we blame her.
We'll pick her brain on the BC run game here in a little bit, right?
Yeah. Well, she can solve that. She's a better person than all.
Exactly, right? Let's start with the head coach, Dan, Jeff Hafley. This is his third year. 6-5 the first year, and I think that for the most part, people seemed pretty optimistic about that 6-5 first season. Seemed on the right track. They go 500 last year, but 3-7 this year. Where does Hafley stand right now, kind of on the popularity scale there among BC fans?
Well, it's funny that you're asking me this week and not last week. I'll just be open and honest about that. If you'd have come to me last week and asked the question, I'd have turned around and said, a lot of people don't actually like the direction of the way things are going because, recency bias when you're looking at a 2-7 season, there's some honest, good, hard questions about the direction of the team and how it looked in certain areas, especially going into the Duke game, not even coming out of the Duke game. When you go back to the Connecticut game, it was pretty dicey there for a hot stretch. But now I think people are starting to see the product of the byproduct of the work. I think the popularity might not be back to its fullest extent that it was in the offseason when, the rumor mill was he's going to leave. We need to do everything to keep him here. But at the same time, they're starting to see some of the byproducts of what BC puts into things and the way this season has gone. And the fact that they were able to pick up that win last week does a lot to kind of grab some of the momentum back that maybe the team didn't have through the first half and in the middle part of the season.
It's funny how, just a win here or there can shift things and change everybody's mood really quickly.
I know. And against a ranked opponent too. And I know that everybody makes the well, it wasn't against Devin Leary and you say, all right, yeah, but that's still a very good football team. And BC hadn't beaten a truly ranked team, and a consensus top 25 team since the USC game back in 2014.
Oh my.
So I mean, when you're able to pick that up, one on the road, which hadn't happened in 16 years or 14 years, it's a big deal to pick that up and to show that type of progress. Because as much as you say, well, there's progress, right? There's stuff in practice. You don't see it. To actually get a tangible result was a really big step for that team.
Well, and I mean, they lost to UConn this year, and that was the first time they had ever lost to UConn. And that's a program that, quite frankly, a lot of people have been talking in the last couple of years. They should just go back to FCS and that kind of thing. I imagine there had to be a lot of people on the cliff at that point, when you drop that game.
I might have been one of them. Given the amount of friends that I have that went to that school, I was really taking that one on the frontal cortex. But that was a really hard one to swallow. That was a incredibly hard game, just to look at and say that you lost that game, because it not only did it look like you lost that game, but it also looked like you didn't have the oomph that you'd had in some of those games when you're like, all right, you're playing tight with Clemson and then you just give up a lot of points at the end, or you were tight with Wake Forest and then the game got away. It was BC lost that game and didn't look good doing it, and that was really the hardest perspective. Now, one of the things that's kind of been the hallmark of this team has always been, when you have adversity, you go through it, you embrace it. You don't look at it and say, all right, we're just going to ignore it and act like it didn't happen, put it away and ignore this result and move on. They legitimately were, we have to look at this. We have to look at everything. How did this happen? This was an unacceptable result given the preparation that we thought we were putting in during the week. So if we're putting in the preparation and if we expect to win, which we do 12 times every year, then we need to go take a look at this and figure out what we're doing wrong. And you saw that a little bit against Duke, where they came out and played better. And then you saw it against NC State, where they actually won a game.
Yeah. So I guess I won't beat around the bush and just get straight to Phil Jurkovec, because obviously he's the biggest subplot to this, this whole game this weekend. So I guess we'll start with, he's obviously making his return to Notre Dame, his third year there at BC now. Injuries have obviously played a big factor in his play the last couple of years. How would you describe the Phil Jurkovec you've seen when he is healthy? And I hope there's enough games, to go on where he has been healthy, but how would you describe full strength Phil Jurkovec?
I feel like he's been the quarterback that you just wish you could have seen more of. And because every time he got started, he ran into some injury that was, every start was a false start for him. That first year, he reinvented the offense and everything was great in 2020. And he come out last year and plays well, but we didn't really know what Phil, the Colgate first part of UMass, that's not really enough to go on to say, well, he was putting it together, especially with those two opponents. And then comes back at the end of the year, diminished, admittedly, after the wrist injury. And then this year had a bunch of problems that really weren't his own doing. It's hard when you're a quarterback and you're playing behind a new offensive line that didn't have the same lineup every week for 6 or 7 weeks. And then you start getting a little frustrated. You start hearing a few footsteps here and there, and don't make the throws that you should necessarily think you should be making, but then you get hurt again. And so now here we are down the end of the season, and you have a quarterback in Emmett Morehead who's playing exceptionally well.
Yeah.
But would Phil Jurkovec have been playing that well behind an offensive line? You can't look at it and say, well, they should have started Morehead at the beginning of the season, because Morehead might not have played that well behind the offensive line that was always in transition. And now we don't get a chance to see what Phil would play behind an offensive line that actually gets to play together for 2-3 games.
Well, and I mean, the sack totals are astounding. Jurkovec has been sacked 25 times, and even Morehead in the times he's played has been sacked 14. That's a lot of sacks they have given up. Are they showing signs of improving? Are they, where is that line in front of those guys right now?
It's getting better. They had a couple of converted defensive linemen on the offensive line, and they were down the depth chart to the degree that when you look at the 2 deep, you're seeing a whole bunch of oars, because if one guy can start, they can take another guy and shift him over to a different position. So when you're playing teams with all these graduate students and transfers or guys who are back for a 5th or 6th year, you're looking at Boston College and you're saying, okay, if the left guard can play, then we can take the guy who's currently playing left guard and move him to right tackle, and the right tackle can shift to left tackle, and the left tackle can go back to right guard. And that was really what it was like for 7 weeks. So
Wow.
yeah, it was real tough. And so it's gotten better because now all right, this is the same offensive line for the third week. The guys know the cadence, they know who's supposed to go where. And as a quarterback, all right, this guy might need a little help on this play, or I might need to roll out to my left or look differently and see different areas. And the contact that these guys were taking in the first 6-7 weeks, it was like watching an old video game where you just saw guys getting like the old Madden games when you saw like the ambulance coming on the field practically. That's how often they were getting hit. And it's good to see that they've made strides forward. I would argue that the line is probably the biggest improvement right now, just because of how bad it was playing for a stretch, and it still needs to get better. I mean, you see what happened with the running stats; it's just not where you'd want it to be at this stage. But it has gotten better thanks to the continuity over the last couple of weeks.
When it comes to Jurkovec himself, do you think that he's lived? There was a lot of hype that followed him from Notre Dame, a highly recruited guy, and he's coming from Notre Dame and all that. Has he lived up to the expectations that people had for him going in there?
I think it's kind of an incomplete. And unfortunately, it's an incomplete because when he played and when he was healthy, the answer was absolutely yes. I mean, this offense, that first year especially, I mean, you felt like you were just scratching the surface, and he's still going to go down as one of the greatest quarterbacks in program history strictly by the numbers. What he did and what he is doing is incredible. It is really unfortunate that he has not been able to play out a full season, because if you extrapolate those numbers, he enters into the conversation as one of the 3 or 4 best quarterbacks that's ever played for Boston College. The problem being is that we may never get to those numbers. We may never see him get to those numbers because he was unable to play a full season.
Interesting. I mean, obviously Flutie and Matt Ryan are the first two who come to mind. What, like Foley? Like, who would you put?
I would, if you extrapolate the numbers, given the fact that he was a 3-year starter, he may have started touching some of Foley's numbers.
Okay.
Those might have been kind of along the lines. And then behind him, you get the Hasselbeck brothers and the Brian St. Pierre's of the world. And I think he would have probably landed and is going to land even within that category, which is a pretty big group of guys who played through the mid 90s through about 2000, right before Matt Ryan got around. So I think when you look at his numbers and how they're going to amass, I would put him more in a category of a Tim Hasselbeck overall, and probably by the end, even maybe Brian St. Pierre, but I think St. Pierre's numbers trend even into the Foley category, at least the bottom end of it.
He's listed at the top of the depth chart this week, even after the game that Moorhead had last week in that win over NC State. Is there any way that he doesn't start, do you think, in this return to Notre Dame this weekend?
I don't know. The whole thing being is everybody's kind of day to day when it comes to their injuries, and that's kind of the good way of putting it. I know that if he's healthy and he's ready to play, he's starting. That's kind of been the message from Jeff Hafley is Phil Jurkovec is very much the starting quarterback. If he is ready to play and if he can go, he will go. And if not, then they'll turn to Moorhead.
I imagine, it's still going to mean something for him coming here because he did start here and everything. He's obviously, had some things to say over the last couple of years. Would probably, there would be a different level of animosity, I guess, if Brian Kelly and some of those guys were still here and compared, with him gone now.
I mean, there'd be a different level of animosity for me. Brian Kelly went to St. John's Prep and is from Chelsea, Mass. And
that's true.
Two towns over from where I grew up in my rival high school. So, I mean, where I went to high school, and I realized it was about 10 years after him, I was like, the minute I found out he was from Chelsea and went to St. John's Prep, I was like, oh, there is no way I can it's just impossible for me to ever root for him. It's just, I can't wrap my. Brian St. Pierre was a St. John's Prep quarterback who went from Danvers, Mass up to, it was playing at BC. I'm sitting in the stands and I'm like, yeah, I'm rooting for him. But he's still a Prep guy.
That's funny because you don't, talk with that Louisiana accent that Brian Kelly thought he had been for a while.
That was probably one of the top 3 funnest, most fun, hilarious days of when he came out and he said that, and I was like, wait a second here. This guy's from Chelsea. This guy lives under the Tobin Bridge. What are we doing? What are we doing here? No one's mistaking you for where you're from.
Well, there's another Notre Dame connection, of course, to this game as well. Subplot number 2, John McNulty, who is the tight ends coach here, and he's in his first season as offensive coordinator there. What's kind of the sentiment around him right now?
The offense has been a work in progress, and I think bringing him in as an offensive coordinator was a good jump off point. I think that, like anything else, when you're working with a new head coach, or a new head coach and a new offensive coordinator combination, there's going to be some growing pains. I think they hit a little bit of that in terms of the beginning of the season, plus a new offensive line coach who inherited a young line that they needed to work with. So I like some of the things that they're doing on offense a lot. I think that some of the different schemes that they put in are just interesting that you see, like some of the downfields, crossing routes and slants that they utilize. They move Zay Flowers around a lot. They'll take him from the slot, move him outside. They'll line him up, put him in motion, bring him through the backfield. They might actually line him up in the backfield and then flank him out. Like, it's some of the things that are in there are complicated, and when you see it, it's been a privilege to watch it kind of develop, even though again the production maybe hasn't been what you want it to be based off of what everyone hoped it would be in August when everyone got to training camp.
Dan, we've talked about here, different Notre Dame rivals these last few weeks, and these two teams used to play obviously a lot more often. From Boston College's perspective, is Notre Dame at the top of the heap in terms of their rivals?
Well, I'll tell you what, about 20 minutes ago, I actually got an opportunity to ask Jeff Hafley that directly, because I was coming at it from a guy who is sitting in the who still remembers listening to David Gordon's kick on the radio in 90.
Wow.
Like I was driving around the mall parking lot trying to listen to the game with my older brother and my mom drive. Oh man, I remember those days. And
you're hurting a lot of Notre Dame people right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who shut this off. And then the next year, in '94, still near and dear to my heart when Notre Dame came out and got smushed at Alumni Stadium that year. In the green jerseys in 02, bringing up a lot of good fond memories that a lot of people have on their laptop with.
That Dillingham game in 02, that's right, with those greens. Yep.
So for me, this will always be number one. Like, this is it. This is my BC could go 1-11, and if the win was over Notre Dame, I'd call the season a success. So they understand that around here. They also understand that it's not a real rivalry if you're not holding up your end of the bargain. And BC has not beaten Notre Dame for a very long time, and that doesn't settle well in Boston, where Notre Dame is a quote home team. I mean, it's a popular team out here, and I've got friends that still constantly get on me about the fact that, is it really a rivalry? There's only one way. There's only one way to make it a rivalry, and
right.
And that's exactly what Jeff Hafley said.
Yeah, that's exactly it. They don't. It's funny because they used to play more often before Notre Dame went into this ACC agreement. I imagine from Boston College's perspective, you'd like to see Notre Dame show up on the schedule more often.
I love it every year. It's the one game that, from a regional standpoint out here, I am a very big proponent of playing local teams. Even though BC lost to Connecticut, I play them every other year and cycle UMass into that. Play UMass and UConn every year if I could. But Notre Dame, if you had to pick one opponent that I could put on that schedule, home and away, every other year, home and home, and ensure that it exists, it'd be this one. And part of it is my relationship to the 90s and BC's rise and Coach Holtz going for it on fourth down.
I mean, that was really it.
Yeah, that was it.
With that. Yeah.
But this game is what I live for. And for me, growing up and going to an Irish Catholic high school where our colors were blue and gold, our fight song was the Notre Dame Victory March, and my athletic director was a Notre Dame guy. It was for me the biggest day of the biggest week on you cannot tell me otherwise. This has to be one of those games that just exists because it is our Army Navy, it is our Iron Bowl, it is our backyard brawl, it's our USC, UCLA, or whichever one you want to put in there.
Dan Rubin from BCEagles.com. We made it, Dan. She looks like she's even sleeping deeper right now than when we started.
I was really worried that her snoring was going to start coming through the microphone, number one. And number two, I'm just going to say we put her to sleep talking football. If this had been her sister, she'd be talking football. So we know which one's the football fan of the family.
I appreciate your time, Dan, because I know, it sounds like you and your wife are plenty busy there these days. So I appreciate you getting that nap in with her while we were doing this.
The time, if you time everything perfectly, you can really dive into your football with your while you're naps. I'm going to give it a couple of years, and then you'll see me. I'll be gray and losing my mind, tearing my hair out. But no, I appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to seeing this game this weekend. I hope it's an enjoyable game, if nothing else, and brings a little fire back to this one, because I feel like for both of our sakes, it'd be really great if BC Notre Dame got a little bit of that fire going again.
Yeah, I think you might be right about that. All right. Thanks again, Dan. Take care.
Thank you.
That is Dan Rubin from BCEagles.com. Can you hear me, Vince?
I can.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Make sure coming back, Woo! I can hear you. That was, of course, pre-recorded. We recorded that the other day when I was up in Evanston, Illinois with Notre Dame women's basketball to make sure, that we got it in and all that kind of stuff with the schedules and everything. So interesting things from here or from him as far as the rivalry, and we'll kind of touch on that here.
I thought so.
In rapid fire, but I'm very impressed with how the baby stayed asleep. Like hearing Dad's voice, and that's a very, I think I can't remember how old, very, very new baby, basically, that he had in his arms during that interview.
I recognize the size, I recognize the passed out look, and I also recognize the fact that a nice, smooth cadence can keep a baby asleep for a very, very long time.
That's true. Maybe the soothing sounds of Dad, was all that it took.
Absolutely.
So we talked before the interview started. They have two that are 18 months apart. So that's something, like we can relate to there.
For sure.
All right, Vince, are you ready for rapid fire?
I'm always ready, baby. Let's go. Game day rapid fire.
Let's do it. So Boston College has allowed 39 sacks this season. Isaiah Foskey needs just one sack to move past Justin Tuck to become Notre Dame's all-time sack leader. Over under 1.5 sacks for Isaiah Foskey today.
You know what? I'll be conservative. I'll say under, just because it seems so obvious that it should be over. I just feel like maybe some other guys are going to get an opportunity to get in there and take part in the sack fest that could be coming, right? I mean, they've given up 5 in the last 2 games apiece, even though the offensive line is getting better. So I'll say under, but I'll tell you what, if you're asking me like on a scale of 1 to 10, whether he gets the record, it's like a 27, because he has the next 2 games. He has the best opportunity to get, USC throws the ball all the time. Now, granted, Williams gets the ball out of his hands much better than the quarterbacks at Boston College, but they throw the ball all the time, and Boston College's offensive line stinks. So, this is the best opportunity. It's a lot better than having Army and Navy left on the schedule. He's got an opportunity to make it happen here, and I'm excited for it.
Yeah, if you're this seems so obvious. It seems so logical that okay, Isaiah Foskey should have had the record, by the way, last week against Navy, of course, of all teams. Would have had the record if not for the face masking call on Maris Leofow. So he would already have the record in hand if that had not happened. I'm just going to say it's got to happen today. It's he's home, gonna, I think he's going to get the record for sure. How many sacks is he going to have? I'm going to say over, just because he's Isaiah Foskey and he's going up against this line. If things play out the way they should play out against a team that does not run the ball well, again, only 61 yards per game that they rush for, there's going to be a lot of passing attempts. He's got to go over today. Some other guys are going to have opportunities as well. BC's offense has allowed 5 sacks in each of their last 3 games. And, 4 times this season, they have allowed at least 5 sacks. So Foskey's got to get the record.
I think we're going to see
again, we expect him to get the record. I think that he'll go over 1.5. What quarter do you think he'll get the record in today?
I think it's going to take a quarter to get settled in. It's going to be cold. I'm going to go second quarter.
Second quarter. Okay.
Yep.
I think it's going to be second quarter as well. I think that they'll protect for a little while, but I think Notre Dame's defensive line will just wear this BC offensive line out at some point. Indy Nation with a super chat. Can I have a stress-free game today, please? My guess is no. So
I mean,
you're just
yeah,
going to have to buckle up and get ready for the ride.
I would love for that to be the case. I would love to have just a boring game where you, me, and Brian are just making fun of each other and having a good time and not, I just don't see that happening. We got spoiled in the first half of the last game. I just don't see that happening. Just don't.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of people first and second quarter. Mark Applegate is saying first play. Okay, well,
That'd be great. Get it out of the way. I mean, okay.
Fill in the blank. It will be blank if we don't see former Notre Dame quarterback Phil Jurkovec playing against the Irish for Boston College today.
I will say disappointing because I do want to see him play against Notre Dame for him, for Notre Dame fans, all of the above. And he's a shell of himself because of all the injuries, because of that offensive line. He's been injury plagued, just can't keep guys off of him. So he's not going to be the Phil that, could have been. But at the same time, I would love to see him play just for his own psyche, play again in Notre Dame Stadium, all of that. So I'm a little sentimental when it comes to that.
Yeah, it will be extremely disappointing because, like when Phil Jurkovec transferred, one of the first things he did, we knew what the future schedules were going to look like. It's like, oh, as long as he doesn't go pro after the first couple of years, he's going to be back at Notre Dame Stadium. Oh, and it's going to be senior day as well. Like Phil Jurkovec could very easily be being honored on senior day today. If, in a different universe, obviously, if things had played out differently. So it's just extremely disappointing if he's not able to play today. You hope that he's able to. I just have to feel like he's going to start the game. Do we know if he's going to start the game? No. How healthy he is. I think we're going to see both quarterbacks today for BC, but I've got to think, and it's like when you've got that rib injury and the knee and everything else that he's dealing with, it really sucks that he's been just beaten up the way he's been beaten up this year, especially. But I mean, you want to see the guy have a chance. Now, you don't want to see him succeed, obviously, but you at least want to see him out there on that field today to some extent. So which quarterback is going to have more total yards today? Drew Pine, Phil Jurkovec, or Boston College backup Emmett Moorhead?
So it's not the combination of BC quarterbacks, right? It's just
correct.
Individual.
One of the three. Because again, Jurkovec's status is up in the air. So we're trying to predict, who's going to have the bigger, who's going to, and this is total yards as well.
Okay. So originally I was going to say that it was the combination of the BC quarterbacks versus Drew Pine. And I was still going to say Drew Pine, but now that it's individual, I'm still going to say Drew Pine. I undersold him last week. I think the over-under was set at 180 passing yards. And I said, I think that's about where he'll be. And people were like, you're nuts. You're crazy. And he had that in the first half. I think he's going to go over. I think he's going to have a decent game today. I think he's going to use his legs a little bit as well. So I think he goes over. I think Drew has the better game.
This just seems like Drew Pine redemption day, after getting beaten up in the second half last week and the whole thing. Because again, if it's not, then you're just like, oh, where's this leading? What's gonna, there are definitely two paths that this can go down.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be Pine as well. Because again, when you go back to that Boston College offensive line and the fact that they don't run the ball, even Phil Jurkovec and Emmett Moorhead both have, Jurkovec has more rushing yards because he has played more, but he has negative rushing yards this season because of the 25 sacks he has taken. So even when he's able to make positive plays with his legs, the net result, it's all offset because of all the sacks that he ends up taking. Yeah. So then it comes down to, and he hasn't had that many big passing games this season. I think it's going to be Drew Pine. Obviously, we don't think that he's going to make a ton of plays with his legs, but that is still an aspect that can be capitalized on a little bit more that we haven't seen a whole lot of. Just look at the rushing touchdown that he had last week and what he was able to do. So I think it's going to be Pine as well, just because of the fact that I think Notre Dame's defense is going to get home a lot today, and that's going to negate whatever positive plays that those guys are able to make.
Yeah.
Today's game will be the 27th all-time meeting between Notre Dame and Boston College. They are the only two, I don't know if you knew this, they are the only two Catholic FBS football programs in the nation. I say that sarcastically. This will also be their 11th meeting in the last 16 seasons. Do you buy or sell the idea of Notre Dame and Boston College playing with more regularity in the future?
I'm actually torn on this, if I'm being honest, Sean, because I think that this game means more to Boston College fans than it does to Notre Dame fans. Now, there's an older sect of fans for Notre Dame that obviously remember 93, and they want to beat Boston College every year because of that.
Right.
And I get that. I was 12 years old when that happened, okay? I remember it. I get it. I understand, right? But then there's the other side of me that says, it's the same argument as the Navy thing. Does this game do anything for you, right? Is Boston College good enough on a regular basis where this game does something for you from a football standpoint? I'm not sure that it does, right? But I do like the fact, and if I'm going to be the traditionalist that I usually am, I do like the fact that they are two schools of similar values, right? And you kind of do want that to a degree on the schedule. I would frankly like to see Boston College on the schedule more so than a Stanford if I'm going to compare things.
Had a feeling.
Yeah. So, I mean, and if you consider these the rivalry games, right? I like this one better than some of the other ones. So, yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing Boston College on the schedule more often. But again, the only problem is this is a bigger game to Boston College than it is to Notre Dame. And I think
that's
it's a hard time to get Notre Dame up for it.
And that's like when you go back to the old schedules that Notre Dame was playing when Brian Kelly got here before the ACC arrangement, Michigan State and Purdue were on the schedule every year.
Yeah.
And Boston College had become a fixture on the schedule as well. And it's funny that Notre Dame Miami went all the way back into the early 1970s. They played every year up until 1990. That series ended. Notre Dame very rarely played Boston College. Well, simultaneously to Miami. Essentially, Boston College got on the schedule with regularity after the Miami series ended. It's like, well, we ended this. We've got to find someone to put on. They're like, well, why not Boston College, apparently, And so Boston College gets on the schedule. And when BC ruins Notre Dame's season in 1993, it's like, boom, it becomes a pretty quick rivalry, right? And then they play virtually every year for 20 years. I think there was a couple of years where they didn't play. But it does mean a lot more to the BC side. That's kind of the point I was making with Michigan State and Purdue. Like for those three teams, and then when you include Pittsburgh in there, I think to an extent as well, the rivalry just means more to the other side than it means for Notre Dame. So like, even though maybe it's more fun to see them on there, I have a hard time keeping it on because of the fact that like, you've got to explain the rivalry to the Notre Dame guys, to the BC guys. It automatically means more. Just like listening to Dan Rubin just a few minutes ago when we were talking about the rivalry aspect. They call it the Holy War at Boston College. They don't call it the Holy War at Notre Dame. So it just means too much to the other side because of the ACC arrangement. They're already playing them quite a bit. So I'm fine with the amount of times that they're playing them right now.
It's pretty consistent. I mean, yeah, it's a little less consistent, with the ACC deal and everything, but it's still fairly consistent. They play them a decent amount. So I guess as long as they keep that up, then I'm cool with it.
Yeah, you're still going to see them.
Yeah.
Again, like if it's between BC and Stanford, I'd probably rather see BC a little bit more. I think we're both in agreement that we would like to see Stanford rotated, like maybe you can play them every few years, but it doesn't need to be every year. It doesn't need to be,
Awesome.
What I'm saying. What I'm saying. Rotate some of these other guys on a little bit more that you don't see with more regularity. What's more likely to happen today? Boston College rushes for at least 90 yards or Notre Dame rushes for at least 220 yards?
I think if we're talking about what is more likely to happen, it's that Notre Dame rushes for 220. I just don't think that Boston College can stop Notre Dame. And I would have said that against Navy as well. That's a different conversation. But at the same time, I think there's going to be a renewed, vigor when it comes to running the football. And I don't know that Boston College can stop them. And I think the passing game is going to open up the run game a little bit more. And, you know, I'll save my next comment for when we talk about which Notre Dame running back does a certain thing. So,
Okay.
But I do think the running game is going to be good. And I think the Notre Dame defense is absolutely going to shut down the run game because they are going to be focused on not only getting after the quarterback, but not allowing them to run the ball either.
What you hope that you don't see is those one-off plays like against UNLV when all of a sudden, you know, like Marcus Freeman was talking afterwards, well, they didn't pull the center. You know, they never showed pulling the center. And then all of a sudden you're getting gashed for a 60-yard run by a UNLV guy that, you know, doesn't hit 60-yard runs very often. It's those one-off plays that kind of concern you, you know, like if they all of a sudden show something different than what they usually show. But I think that, you know, again, because the sack totals in college football count toward rushing yards and Notre Dame, you know,
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
Good point.
So I think that Notre Dame is much more likely to rush for 220. But at the same time, I think they've got a good chance to have a balanced attack. BC has allowed 200-plus yards 3 times this season, including the last 2 games against NC State and Duke. And, of course, they won one of those games, which is, you know, it's like, I didn't get to see that game, but like the fact that NC State ran for that many yards and BC was still able to win the game is amazing. Yeah. But the Eagles have topped 100 rushing yards just twice, and that was against Maine and Louisville. So like I don't see them approaching that 90-yard mark, especially because of the fact that the sack totals count.
The sack total thing makes it a clean sweep for me. I mean, that makes me on the edge to not even close to the edge because that number is going to go way back because of the sacks.
Right. Which game is Notre Dame more likely to lose in the next 2 weeks? Boston College or USC?
I mean, it should be USC. That should be the answer here because the USC is a better roster. They're a better team. They're number 7 team in the country, right? It should be USC. The problem is Marshall and Stanford.
Yes.
So I can easily see how somebody would go the other direction, but the answer to me is still USC. I just feel like Notre Dame has their home woes figured out, and they're not going to have a letdown this week, and it's got to be USC. But my goodness, if I'm wrong, it's going to be a long night.
What if I told you?
Oh, God.
I don't think it's been about a home and away. I think it's been about who you're playing. That's when you look at how this season has played out, that is exactly the better games have come against the better teams, and the worst games have come against the worst teams. It's just that they have happened to play more of the worst teams at home. And now you're going to add in the whole senior day mystique to things. Unfortunately, I still think it is today. Now, maybe they show that they've moved past that. But, you know, again, like early in the season, we thought it was home versus away, but it's been about the level of competition. They've played up and they've played down. And that's the biggest thing they've got to get figured out today. Are you finally going to not play down? Or are you finally going to be the better team when you're supposed to be the better team? Because I've got every confidence that they can stand toe-to-toe with USC.
Me too.
Next week. Now, there's just enough doubt in my mind because of the 2 teams that you mentioned, Marshall and Stanford. And that's, you know, and then you throw in the second half against Navy last week. So to me, it's today. Get past today and things. I'm more confident next week.
I get what you're saying, man, and that's the sad part.
Yeah.
That's the absolute sad part.
I know. Which Irish running back is going to have the biggest game today?
I think it's going to be Audric Estime, and one of the cool, and I should have started, but I didn't. But one of the fans in the chat said, "Good luck tackling Audric Estime. There's going to be a lot of arm tackles today because of the cold." And I remember, and obviously this is not a great comparison, but I remember we had a fullback. We ran triple out of the I in my high school, and I played safety, and we would go 1-on-1s a lot.
Little Tom Osborne action there.
And we went, you know, we would go 1-on-1s and it would be full go. And I remember trying to step up into the hole and tackle our fullback when it was freezing cold outside. It hurts, man. Like, it hurts. And I can only imagine what it would feel like to hit Audric Estime when it's 23 degrees outside. It's going to hurt. And I think there's going to be a lot of business decisions made when Audric Estime is coming up the middle. So I'm going with Audric on this one.
Yeah, I want it to be Chris Tyree
I
because of
know.
the multifaceted, dimension that he brings, but I think it's going to be Estime as well. I think we probably maybe see more of Tyree and Diggs through a good chunk of the game, but as long as Notre Dame is playing with the lead at the end, Audric Estime, the business decision thing that you said is absolutely right. He's going to make some people miserable, I think, in the fourth quarter potentially. So I think it's going to ultimately end up being Estime as well. Scale of 1 to 10, Sparks 5219 is saying Diggs. Scale of 1 to 10, what chances do you give the Irish to have their first 100-yard wide receiver of the season today?
Oh, man. I thought they had a great shot at it last week. This week, I'm going to go with a 4 because is it possible? It's absolutely possible. I am not overly confident that it is going to happen for play calling reasons, for it's going to be a little windy down there at Notre Dame Stadium and it's going to be cold. I get that. So I'm going to give it a 4, saying there's a chance, but I just am not convinced that it is going to happen.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a 2.
Even lower.
I don't see it. Again, the way last week started out, Craig's going 5, so he's saying 50-50, which, percentage-wise, what is this? Game number 11?
Yeah.
It's like
Yes,
we
it
still
is.
haven't seen one. And again, you almost had 2 in the first half last week. But that's right, Zach. Wide receivers are for blocking. We should all know that by now. So I'm going to say 2. I'm just not that high on it. Michael wants to know how many Boston College players have the flu. I don't know. It's like that's one of those things that you sort of find out after the game when Hafley is talking with the media. We'll see who ends up playing today. They do have some sick guys. This is a good question from Stymie. Do we see Evans take a snap again in preparation for his pass attempt next week?
I mean, he took one last week. We didn't see it on TV, but he did take one.
Yes, and that's a good call by Stymie, though. It's going to happen at some point. You've got to have a pop pass from Mitchell Evans the way they're and next week would make the most sense because the weather's going to be warmer than it is here in South Bend, with colder air and all that kind of stuff for this game today. I think a pop pass is coming from Mitchell.
I want to see him take the snap and roll out because everybody's going to be focused on the middle. I want to see him roll out, get to the outside, have some throw run options out there. That's what I want to see. Or maybe even a throwback to Drew Pine going around. There's a lot of things you could do, my friend.
Yep. Super chat from David. Great show. Donation for Vince to keep up the lucky threads. We appreciate that. And David also wants to know, how many times have you washed the sweatshirt since it became good luck?
I'm embarrassed to say 0. I have not washed it.
No washing either. You're not.
No, but I haven't.
To the
but
game
I haven't
today,
worn it. I haven't worn it any other day though either. Just wear it on Saturday, fold it back up, put it on the shelf. So, but yeah, 0.
Another super chat. 21-point favorite, guys. Please no Marsh. Stand part 3. You're right. 21-point favorite, but again, they're 0-5 against the spread when they've been double-digit favorites this season, and they have lost 2 of those games straight up to Marshall and Stanford. So. I wouldn't be betting this game.
I'm not touching
If I'm going to bet this game, I'm betting BC to cover.
I'm not touching it. Not with a 10-foot pole. I found there is a and I'm plugging a certain site, but on DraftKings they had one of those ones that are set up for you automatically, and the spread was 13, and it was a combination. It was like a parlay. It gave like plus 500 odds. I took that, but I can't go 21. So I took a 13. Can't go 21.
5 straight games with a block punt. Do they get one today?
Yep. I do. I think they get
one. Roll with that. I'd roll with that for sure.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Prediction. Besides pain. What's your prediction
Pain
today?
for Boston College. Ooh. Look, this is one of the – I shouldn't say it's one of the hardest. They've all been hard because I just don't know anything about this team. That's the problem. I know who they want to be. I know who they have been. I know who they have been at certain times, and I know who they've been at other times. And you just don't know. And it's like you're pulling numbers out of the air when it comes to this team and what they're able to do. And it is very difficult for me to pick this game. I obviously, I think Notre Dame is going to win. I think they are going to win going away. I picked 37-14 for no reason in particular. I think that's what it should be. Brian always talks about what should be and what will be and how those are 2 completely different things. And I get that. So what should be is 37-14. What will be is probably like 21-14. So I'm obviously picking Notre Dame to win. I'm not backing down on that in any way. I just think the margin is 100% up for grabs.
Yeah. So you may or may not have heard this before, but this is a game that Notre Dame should clearly dominate. Clearly.
Yep.
But again, it's also the sixth time we could say that this season, because it's the sixth time Notre Dame has been a double-digit favorite this season, but they are 3-2 straight up in those previous such games. 3-2 straight up in games as a double-digit favorite. They have not covered the spread in any of those 5 games. This is a BC team scoring just 19 points a game, rushing for 2.1 per carry. That is insane for an FBS football program. And again, Phil Jurkovec and Emmett Moorhead have been sacked 39 times behind that offensive line. So this is a game, again, like we were just talking about with the rivalry, it means more to Boston College. How much is that going to factor in today? I changed my score a little bit from the one that we put up on the website.
You're allowed.
But not by a lot. I've got Notre Dame 27-17. That's just
by 10. Okay.
That's the only thing I feel comfortable with right now.
I don't feel comfortable with anything.
It's, on paper, it's a total mismatch.
It is.
But we've seen it before this year, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a lot of people predicting fairly lopsided games. This is the closest one that I've seen. Sparks 52-19, 29-16. I could see it being somewhere in that range as well. All right, a few national games to roll through before we wrap things up. 22nd ranked Oklahoma State at Oklahoma. It's Bedlam, Vince. I tell you, Bedlam.
Well, that's what they tell me. And, I'm a little surprised that the Sooners are 7-point favorites in this one, considering what's happened to them this season. But the defense has forced an awful lot of turnovers lately, and the Cowboy offense just loves giving the ball away. So because of that, I am going to go with Oklahoma, but not by 7. I'm going to go 31-27.
Yeah, I don't like picking this game because Oklahoma State's offense has disappeared. Just 36 total points in the last 3 games, but Oklahoma's defense has just been a sieve all season, and they have forced 8 turnovers the last couple of games, but they've still lost both games as well. The Cowboys are still in 3rd place in the Big 12, so they've got something to play for, still a chance for them to get to the Big 12 championship game, to repeat in the conference championship game. And, they win a game this week and then get some help from either West Virginia or Kansas, who are both playing Kansas State. They've got an opportunity. So I'll say it'll be close. I'll say the offense comes back. Oklahoma State 31, Oklahoma 27.
Oh, nice.
Now we've got the battle for Los Angeles. 7th ranked USC at 16th ranked UCLA, playing in the Rose Bowl today.
Yeah, so this one's a really tough one for me because I can never look at a game without looking at the implications for Notre Dame. I am hardwired for that to be the case. And this game obviously has Notre Dame implications written all over it. USC's ranked number 7. They got 1 loss. It's a 1-point loss to Utah. UCLA, they're still ranked 16th in the country, so they're still ahead of Notre Dame, even though I believe they lost last week. But my gut says UCLA because I think they're the more physical team, and I think they can out-physical USC. My gut says UCLA. My heart wants USC to win because I want Notre Dame to be the ones to knock off USC.
Yeah.
So I went prediction-wise, I went with my heart, and I said USC 41, UCLA 35.
Ooh, we're not that far. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I wouldn't be surprised if UCLA won because I think they can beat up USC in the trenches.
We're not that far off. UCLA, of course, shocked in that loss to Arizona last week. But USC, they've kept on going. Who's the only team to beat them, though? Of course, Utah, physical football. UCLA, far more physical. Do they have enough firepower to keep up? Because their Achilles heel is also pass defense, and Caleb Williams is averaging 14 yards per completion this season. So I've got a lot of points. I've got USC winning 45-41.
Ooh, yeah, we are in the neighborhood.
Another Pac-12 game that we're picking this week. 10th ranked Utah at number 12, Oregon.
I think the biggest question about this one is how is Oregon going to respond after they lost to Washington last week, right? I mean, that was kind of an unexpected situation. Washington's been playing well, but I didn't think they were playing well enough to beat Oregon, right? And this is good. This one's going to go a long way in determining who is headed to the Pac-12 title game as well. I mean, USC isn't a lock, and there are 3 teams with 1 loss. The Trojans have that extra win because they play Notre Dame. The extra win in the Pac-12 because they've already played it, right? Because they play Notre Dame in the final week of the season. So whoever wins this game controls their destiny and the game in Eugene. So that gives the Ducks some momentum. And I'm sure they're looking to get that Washington loss out of their mouth. I like the Ducks here because they can score. Utah is the more physical team, and that is how they beat USC earlier in the year. So can they slow down the Oregon offense? I don't think they can slow it down enough. But I don't know. I picked Oregon 28-25 over Utah. I don't know why.
You sounded like you were trying to talk yourself into something else for a while there.
I know.
So.
As I was going through it, I'm like, this is a pick'em game for me, to be honest with you, because it's 2 completely different styles going up against each other.
Right. Bottom line for me, it came down to when Utah has lost, it's been because of the run game. Florida ran for 283 against them. UCLA ran for 203. And I think Oregon can do the same with, obviously, the quarterback Bo Nix and his running and everything. So, again, I like points, but I think that Oregon, again, I went back and forth on this just like you. I've got Oregon, though, winning 42-36. Another high-scoring game. Notice, by the way, we very rarely pick Big Ten games on this show.
Because the Big Ten stinks.
That's exactly right. And that was going to be my point. You've got a whole division that sucks. You've got 2 teams worthwhile in the other division. And, of course, they play next week.
How about Navy? They're up on UCF right now.
Really?
Yes, they are. 7-3.
Wow. Got a little confidence early on.
Just saying.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for today's show. Thanks to everybody for being with us today. As always, going to have a little bit different schedule for Thanksgiving week next week because of, I'm going to be traveling and, we've got all different kinds of stuff going on, but we will be with you on Monday for IB Nation Sports Talk. We'll talk about what the rest of the week looks like then. So enjoy the game. Fingers crossed. Stay warm wherever you are. Vince, I'll see you in a couple hours.
Yes, you will, my friend. I got a lot to do between now and then, so I'll see you then.
Me too. All right. Sounds good. Talk to you later. Have a good one. Post-game show, of course, coming up later today.
Right.
Thanks for joining us. IB Countdown to Kickoff.